Picture this. It's dark outside. The cold, snowy mountains of a mining town are off in the distance. The glow of the town is approaching with each lumbering step you take. There's a person on either side of you, but you have no clue who they are. When they tell you to walk, you walk, almost as if they command you. But who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here? This is essentially the opening of Final Fantasy VI. Now, we've covered a variety of topics on Final Fantasy VI, ranging from the parallels of an opera and Celes's attempt to quit life, to Banon's second life outside of the Returners, all the way to Gogo's identity. But one thing eludes us all: the slave crown. I really think Square missed a huge opportunity to make this already amazing game even more amazing. Some questions arise with the mere existence of this key item. Was Terra a rebellious teenager? Was it destroyed at the hands of Arvis? Why wasn't it used as a possible plot point later on? Or was it? We're gonna dive in as deep as we can go, so hop into your Magitek armor and let's get started. Here's what we know. 3 people overlook a cliff and speak about finding what's called an esper in the caves beyond the town. When playing it for the first time, no one knows what this means yet, but it's apparently a really big deal. These 2 soldiers speak about this girl as if she's not even present. And that's because she isn't really. This green-haired girl has amnesia, and based off of the text within the game, is wearing what's called a slave crown, which makes her a puppet for the Empire, which is who sent these 3 to investigate the Esper. Quoting the game here, the slave crown on her head robs her of all conscious thought. But why would she need this slave crown, you might be asking yourself? If we back up just a bit, we can see that she fried 50 of our Magitek armored soldier in under 3 minutes. After some events that I won't spoil here, we meet this wobbly fellow named Arvis. Arvis has taken the slave crown off of Terra. Oh, her name is Terra, by the way. And when this happens, she has no recollection of anything, proving that the slave crown is quite the powerful little trinket to have on hand. Some dogs and Imperial soldiers beat on the door to demand their girl back. Terra scurries off into the caves, falls down a hole, and that's when the next important bit of story happens. We see this fellow here. Oh, his name is Kefka, by the way. A funny little clown man who is actually vicious deep down. Kinda like John Wayne Gacy, but not. Anyway, so we see here that Kefka is the one that placed the slave crown on Terra's head. And then we actually see when Terra started frying the 50 soldiers like these 2 mentioned earlier. Oh, their names are Biggs and Wedge, by the way. Once the slave crown is on, I just wanted to point out something incredibly interesting here. Terra is the only one not saluting after Gestahl gives his speech here. Oh, his name is Gestahl, by the way, and he's the Emperor. Why do you think she doesn't salute like everyone else? It's simple, because no one commanded her to. This is a small, minute thing that I missed the first 28 years I played this game. And look at it, it's right there in the game, in every version. Anyway, after Terra gets saved by Smokey and the Bandits, or Bandit and the Cave Cats, these are Mughals, by the way, we never hear of the slave crown again, with the exception of when the party explains to other party members and NPCs why she has amnesia. I've already got some questions, so let's just dive in. So, question. If Biggs and Wedge are using the excuse of frying 50 people in order to justify having the crown put on her, then why did it show that event happening after the crown had been placed on her head? If we're led to believe she's a strong force that needs controlling, what was the point of then showing her destroy the 50 soldiers after she was already in control? Was that supposed to show how powerful Terra is? Because she's in Magitek armor. Of course she's gonna completely obliterate people just standing there when she's in a huge piece of machinery that destroys everything in sight. Or maybe, just maybe, this isn't the 50 soldier massacre event in question, and this happened after she fried the people. And just like I brought up, maybe seeing that prompted Kefka to get Terra under control with the slave crown. Maybe Terra was rebelling against the Emperor and his people she'd been around since she was quite literally a baby. There's even a deleted text string where she fights having the crown put on her head. And since we know that Arvis is the one that took the slave crown off of her head, where is it now? It's implied, mainly by the wiki, that Arvis just destroys the slave crown. End of story, that's it. We don't ever see it again. But why? Okay, real quick, just humor me. I've thought about this maybe too much. Kefka is the one that put the slave crown on Terra, right? Right. We've already established this. Is it then safe to assume that Kefka is the one that created it? Could technology from the Empire exist that aided in its development? If the answer to both of these questions is yes, then what's stopping Kefka or the Empire from creating another one, or another 5? I mean, nothing really, but they just don't. It's the only one spoken of. So knowing this, what would have happened if Kefka found Celes after the floating continent incident and threw it on her? The floating continent is a huge plot point that I'm not gonna spoil here. How different would the game have been at this point? Would Sabin have been able to hold the house from collapsing in Zen? Would Terra ever regain the motivation to fight? Even more interesting is the thought of Arvis giving the party the slave crown right before the floating continent thing happens. And then Shadow comes in at the last second like he would have done anyway, slaps the crown on Kefka, and now the party has control of everything. Or even better, after the final battle at the end, they slap it on a weak Kefka and reverse everything, taunting him. It would have been a glorious book into the game, having opened with the slave crown being such a huge deal. Would General Leo have survived and joined the party? Could we have convinced Gao's dad to not be such a jerk to his son? What would happen if we fitted the fandom train with the crown? Okay, that one's a bit much, but you see my point. It could have been used in place of the leap command to make the whole Velt thing a little easier. Or wait! What if that's how Banon can live his second life I talked about in another video? He just puts it on his wife while he goes and does his thing. I mean, Arvis and Banon are literally almost side by side in Vector later on in the game, so maybe it's not that far-fetched of a thought. Or why not just put it on Shadow so we can have Clyde in the party and learn the real fate of Baram? I mean, we all know now that Gogo is Baram, but also Clyde could have repaired his relationship with Realm. And all sorts of stuff. Good lord, what would happen if we put it on an Esper? Okay, now I'm just getting a little wild, but what if it was a plot point later on in the game and it was used by Cid? After the events of the floating continent, Celes wakes up 1 full year later, having slept the whole time. How wild is it to think that the slave crown was placed on Celeste's head, and she just doesn't remember anything that happened during that time? I mean, at that point, Cid could have just made up everything, and of course Celeste would just believe him, because how would she know otherwise? Now, there's not a great deal to support this really, but there's not a lot of evidence that doesn't support it. Except for the small fact that Arvis probably didn't exactly carry it with him to Vector, which is where he was when the floating continent thing happened. But that's also where Cid was in the Magitek factory, so... Either way, it's a fun little theory, but honestly, I just think the slave crown was a very convenient plot device, and that's kind of it. I don't honestly believe Cid would do something like that to someone he describes as essentially his own granddaughter. Plus, Terra eventually gains her memory back, along with the strength and the ability to fight again. And Celes remembers everything from the moment she wakes up, so that kind of disproves that theory anyway. But what do you think? Leave a comment with your theory about the slave crown or any other item in Final Fantasy VI. Or just leave a comment to show your support for the channel. The links to everything that I used are in the description below if you want to look at any of the pages I used to gather this information. And lastly, earlier I mentioned Banon living a second life, and I really went in deep with this one. Instead of digging around for that video, I just went ahead and put it here.